That's being done, I want to read a passage out of the book of Matthew, the 27th chapter. I'm going to begin in verse 26 and read on down through verse 30. Matthew 27, verse 26 through 30. It says, Then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall, gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. They stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they'd platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, a reed in his right hand. They bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! They spit upon him. They took the reed, smote him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him, put his own raiment on him, and led him away to be crucified. And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. When they were come unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of the skull, they gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall. When he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. He crucified him and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. Sitting down, they watched him there. Set over his head this accusation written, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Then there were two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand, the other on the left. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, saying, Thou that destroyed the temple, build it in 3 days, save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests mocked him with the scribes and the elders, saying, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we'll believe it. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now if he will save him. And he said, I am the Son of God. The thieves also, which were crucified with him, cast the same in his teeth. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness all over the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, This man calleth for Elias. Straightway one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with vinegar, put it upon a reed, and gave him to drink. The rest said, Let be. Let us see whether Elias will come to save him. And Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. A little under 2 minutes to read that passage. Yet it really encompasses about 33 years of the life of this one who existed in the form of the Father, yet he humbled himself, took upon himself the form of man just as you and I, ultimately humbling himself unto this death. Now you read that and you read some of the things, and I'd encourage you, if you would like to, just find a physician's description of the crucifixion. This is horrible enough. But whenever you find out from a scientific aspect, what would happen to the body when one underwent this? You see it and then you're horrified. But you also multiply it over and over, because this is one who did nothing whatsoever. No guile was found in his mouth. He knew exactly what was before him when he came to this earth. He knew what was before him as he prayed in the garden, and he knew what was before him as he hung on the cross, having that hope, just as you and I, to return to heaven. But you look at that and you wonder, how could anybody endure this? If they could have, as he said in the garden, call those legions of angels, how could he hang on this cross? How could he go through the years preceding it? How could he go through the mockery, the desertion of his loved ones, the desertion of those who were committed to him supposedly, the denials, and yet still hang on that cross? And you think about what held him there. We know he was nailed to the cross, but physical nails would mean nothing to the Son of God. So what was it that held him on the cross? Well, you think about that, and there are several passages I just want to look at briefly. You think about, for example, in the book of John, the 14th chapter, you find where the Lord speaks about some of the things that were upon him. John 14, and I'm going to read verse 25 through verse 31. John 14, beginning in verse 35. 31, rather. 25 through 31. I'll get there in a moment. Verse 25 through 31. These things have I spoken unto you, being yet present with you. But the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will bring into my name, he shall teach you all things, bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you. So he's telling them, he's informing them, I'm going to die. I'm going to leave you. We know in the book of John, in the 14th chapter, the beginning of it, he said, let not your heart be troubled. I go to prepare a place for you. But he goes on and he's speaking of that same aspect of him departing. And in verse 27, he says, peace I live with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. You have heard how I said unto you, I go away, and I will come again to you. If you love me, you would rejoice, because I said, I go unto the Father, for my Father is greater than I. And now I have told you before it came to pass, that when it came to pass, you might believe. Hereafter I will not talk much with you, for the prince of this world cometh, and have nothing in me. But that the world may know that I love the Father. And as the Father gave me commandment, even so do I. Arise and let us go hence. So you look at that and you think about what held him there. Well, whenever he was in the garden, he prayed, let this cup pass, nevertheless not my will but thine. And it was the love of his Father. He loved his Father. We talked this morning about how heaven holds all for me. The Father is in heaven. And he spoke about this love for God. And you think about us, as we look at this, there are a couple of things, and I'm going to mention at the last, I think one of the most important messages, but you think about this and the trials we go through. But the love that we have for God constrains us to face whatever trial, whatever struggle. We know God. We know of his love for us. And just as Jesus hung on that cross, and why is it you would go there? That the world may know I love the Father. But then secondly, you look and you find in John 13, in verse 1, it says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. I've mentioned before several times where the picture, I've got a little postcard posted in my office. And it's a little girl looking unto him and saying, how much do you love me? And he said, this much. Spread his arms and died. Every single one of us needs to realize that whenever you read John 3:16, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Whenever you read in the Roman letter, while we were yet without strength, he gave his life for us. Whenever you read in John, I am the good shepherd, I lay down my life for my sheep. I mean, the depth of love for us is just unimaginable. You know, scarcely for a righteous man would some die. But he was willing to give his life for you and I while we were yet sinners. Why? Love. What held him to the cross? Love. Love for the Father. Love for you and I. But you do that, and as we spoke of this morning, you know, you realize that you have to have a purpose, a goal, something before you. And you think about what Peter said. Over in the book of 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, we find in verse 21, reading on down through verse 24, it says, hereunto were you called, because Christ suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow in his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled not again, when he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself unto him that judgeth righteously. In his own self he bare our sins in his own body in the tree, that we being dead to sin should live righteous unto him righteousness, by whose stripes you're healed. But in the center of that, he committed himself, and as he said on the cross, into thy hands I commend my spirit. As he said in the garden, not my will but thine. The ultimate trust. Whatever the horrors that stand before him, stand before us. a trust in the Father. Back in the Old Testament, we know that He'll do right. We know today that we can trust Him, that it's a fact. All things work together for good to them who love God and are called according to His purpose. It doesn't say that all things are good. Things hurt. Things are difficult. That narrow way. But it's going to be okay if we trust in the Father. And that's what held Jesus to the cross, knowing that, yes, why He came, why He lived, why He suffered, and why He was about to die, all were there and rolled up in this trust in God. That, yes, this was a plan revealed in Genesis 3:15, but was throughout eternity there. That we might have His death for us, and that His death would bring about that great salvation. That we could live a life of righteousness before the Father because of Him. And all of that, the trust He had in God, was so amazing. You know, we look and we cast our cares upon Him because we know He cares. And we know He cannot lie. And we know with Him all things are possible. That trust that Jesus had, we too can have. And then it was His obedience. You go back to the book of Hebrews in chapter 5. Notice in verse 8 and 9, it says, though He were Son, yet He learned obedience by the things that He suffered. Being made perfect, He became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey Him. It was the Father's will. Remember as He prayed in the garden, not my will, but thine. And it was the Father's will that He was aware of throughout all eternity. But now having upon Him the form of man, He suffered. No doubt He felt fear, just as you and I. And yet in all of that, He says, not my will, but thine. It was God's will. You know, the other night, I think it was Jared who was talking about prayer. And how that we don't always get the answer we want, but we get the answer that's needed. You do realize that in the garden, Jesus said, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. And His Father said, no, there's not another way. This is the only way. And thus He humbled Himself unto the death of the cross. He hung upon that cross because of obedience to the Father. Again, I look and, you know, I marvel at times whenever I read the Bible and say, well, if I do that, that's so hard. I go back and I think about the cross. I think how foolish I am. Here was one who, facing the unimaginable horrors of crucifixion, let the Father's will be done. I must obey the Father. My meat, He said at one time, is to do the will of my Father which is in heaven. What made Him live? What made Him die? So He hung on the cross because of obedience to God. And then in Hebrews, the 12th chapter, this is something sometimes overlooked. In the book of Hebrews, the 12th chapter, after seeing the roll call of faith, those actions that were set forth, in verse 1, he says, wherefore, seeing we're compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and run with patience the race that is set before us. The examples of old help us. But then he goes on and he says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. You look at that and you think, what was the joy set before it? Look in the mirror. You and I, living that righteous life. That He hung on the cross because of His love for God, because of His love for you, because of His trust in God, because of His obedience. And He now looks and He sees those who will follow Him, who trust just like He did, who obey just like He did, who love just like He did. We're the joy. The joy of us being with Him. We need to realize, of course, that's the joy that we ought to have. We rejoice knowing that whatever is on this earth, we have that heavenly home, that He's gone to prepare a place for us, that where He is, we will be also. No more tears, no more sorrow, no more pain. And when we go to be with Him, the writer in Romans 8th chapter says we will be heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ, the one who has gone before. You and I, and the hope that we can have, held Him to that cross. So you think about that, you see all that is, and then you realize, of course, that we have a cross to bear. We're to take up our cross, follow after Him, and it's no wonder then that He says, looking unto Him. You think about it. I told you there's another lesson that I think is the greatest. In 1 John 4 and verse 19, the writer simply states, we love Him because He first loved us. You know, so many times I think we become a little weak. It happened to all of us. We become a little discouraged. And we try to excuse ourselves from backing away from that we know which is right. And sometimes we blame it on a lot of things around us. But in actuality, what holds us to the cross we bear is love for Him. Knowing who He is, knowing what He's done, knowing what He made possible for us. Jesus came in the flesh. You find Him performing miracles to demonstrate who He was. But whenever He faced the trials and the struggles, He showed us so many times what we as people can do. And the thing that held Him there, the things, are the same things you and I have. Same thing. We struggle, we face those trials, but the same thing holds us to the cross we bear. We don't want to cast it aside. We want to run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto the author and finisher of our faith. You know, years ago, I wrote a little poem that I oftentimes go back and read. When sin seemed so pleasant, my will such a loss, please lead me, dear Father, to the shadow of the cross. When my strength I feel can carry me in the way, Father, lead me to the cross, and its shadow help me stay. When the trials of life seem so heavy, the burdens too hard to bear, Father, lead me to the shadow that I may see who hangs there. Father, may my eyes be open to the one who set me free. May I live always in the shadow of the cross He bore for me. We sing a song about lead me to the cross. I pray that in those times of weakness that I have, that I always have in my heart and my mind, the desire, the ability to go back to the shadow of the cross. Because whenever I go back and I see Him hanging there, and I know why He did it, the center is love. Love for Father, obedience to the Father, but it's centered upon a love for you and I, that He wants us to have that joy where He now is. What do you think about it tonight? What is your joy? What is your hope? Are you bearing your cross? Like I said, sometimes we get a little bit self-centered and explain away, we think, why we don't. But there's really no reason. Jesus bore it for us. And we can bear the cross as we live for Him. First of all, you got to take it up. You need to realize the futility of living in this world, following the ways of the world, and instead get rid of that old man of sin. Romans the 6th chapter. Whenever we are baptized into Christ, that old man of sin is put to death, and we rise to walk in the newness of life, but we walk with God. The God who said, I'll be with you, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. But you got to begin. And as you go along the way and you falter, and you will, think back to the cross. Think about the one who hung there for you and I. If we can help you to do that tonight, let's do it as we stand and sing the song of invitation.